Born Joanne Deborah Bryan in 1947 in New York City, Assata Shakur was the first woman to appear on the FBI's most wanted terrorist list. An activist in black radical groups such as the Black Panther Party and the Black Liberation Army, Shakur was convicted of murdering a New Jersey state trooper in 1977, but supporters helped her make her prison escape and take refuge in Cuba. Hey guys, it's Kid Nerd here with my new series Most Wanted, which will cover the most wanted criminals that are still on the run. If you like this series, please give it a comment and a like, and please comment who you want me to cover next. Shakur spent the first years of her life with her school teacher mother, Doris E. Johnson, and her grandparents, Lula and Frank Hill. After her parents divorced, she split time living with her mother and lived at her grandparents' house that lived in Wilmington, North Carolina. Shakur grew up in the 1950s when Jim Crow or racial segregation was the law of the land of the South. White and black people drank from separate water fountains and attended separate schools, churches, and sat in different parts of the buses, trains, and restaurants. Despite Jim Crow, Shakur's family instilled a sense of pride in her. In 3rd grade, Shakur attended a mostly white school in Queens, New York. She struggled to inhabit in the role of a model black child. Even the teachers and students reinforced the message of superiority of a white culture. As Shakur progressed through elementary school and middle school, the differences between black and white people became more pronounced. In her autobiography, Shakur describes herself as an intelligent, curious, but somewhat troubled childhood. She ended up in the care of her Aunt Eveline, a civil rights worker. Despite her aunt's support, the troubled teen quit high school and got a low-paying job. She eventually met some African students at a bar and had a conversation with them about the world. This included the Vietnam War. This discussion marked a turning point in Shakur. She said the year was 1964. I never forgot that day, she said. We are taught at such an early age to be against communists, yet most of us don't have the faintest idea of what communism is. Only a fool will let someone tell who the enemy is. Although Shakur dropped out of high school, she continued her education and earned her GED. Afterwards, she studied both at the Manhattan Community College and the City College of New York. As a college student during the 1960s, Shakur joined the black activist group the Golden Drums and took part in various rallies, sit-ins, and fights for ethnic studies. Her first arrest came in 1967 when she and other students chained themselves to the BMCC building to draw attention to the lack of the Black Studies department. Through activism, Shakur met her husband, Louis Chesimard, also a student activist, but they were divorced in 1970. After her marriage ended, Shakur headed to California and volunteered at Alcatraz prison during its occupation by the Native American activists who objected to the US government's failure to honor treaties and general opposition of the race. The activists' calmness during the occupation inspired Shakur. She returned to New York in 1971, and that's when she adopted the name that we know now, Assata Shakur. Assata means she who struggles, Ogbala means the love for the people, and Shakur means the thankful. She felt the name Joanne didn't suit her because she identified as the African woman and wanted a name that better reflected that. To further embrace her African heritage, Shakur, like many others in the 1960s, stopped straightening her hair and grew it out to an afro. In New York, Shakur joined the Black Panther Party. Unlike other activists at the time, the Panthers did support violence if necessary. While the guns they carried made a number of news headlines, the group took concrete positive actions to help the black community, such as establishing a free breakfast program to feed low-income children. They also helped victims of police brutality. One of the most important things that the Black Panther Party did, they made it really clear who the enemy was, not the white people, but the capitalists, the imperialists, and the oppressors. While Shakur grew close to the Black Panther Party, Shakur started to grow close to a fellow Black Panther member called Zaid Shakur, who despite the last name has no relation. She quickly grew critical of the group, believing they needed to be better educated about African American history and to develop a systematic approach to challenge racism. She also questions its leaders and their lack of self-criticism and reflection. Joining the party led Shakur to be surveyed by law enforcement agencies. She said, "Everywhere I went, it seemed like I would turn around and find 2 detectives following behind me. I would look out my window and there, in the middle of Harlem, in front of my house, would be 2 white men sitting and reading the newspaper. I was scared to death to talk in my own house. When I wanted to say something that wasn't public information, I turned up the record player real loud so the buggers would have a hard time hearing." Despite her fears of surveillance, Shakur continued her political activism, joining the radical Black Liberation Army, which she described as a people's movement, and the resistance to the political, social, and economic oppression of African Americans. Shakur began to get into serious legal trouble during her involvement in the BLA. She faced charges related to a bank robbery and the armed robbery in which she was shot. She also faced charges related to a murder of a drug dealer and the attempted murder of a policeman. Each time the cases were thrown out, Shakur was found not guilty, but that would soon change. On May 2nd, 1973, Shakur was in the car with 2 other BLA members, Sandiata Okoli and her close friend Zaid Malik Shakur. A state trooper named James Harper stopped them on the New Jersey Turnpike. Another trooper, Werner Foster, followed in a different patrol car. During the stop, gunfire was exchanged. Werner Foster and Zaid Malik Shakur were both killed, and Assata and Harper were both wounded. Shakur was later charged with the murder of Foster and spent several years incarcerated before her trial. Shakur said she was terribly treated while imprisoned. She was placed under solitary confinement for more than a year in the men's facility. She was tortured, beaten. She also had bigger problems in there as well. She became pregnant with a child of a fellow inmate and BLA member Kamau Siddiqa. In 1974, she gave birth to her daughter Kayuka. While she was pregnant, Shakur's murder trial was declared a mistrial for fear she would miscarry, but the trial was finally carried out in 1977, and she was convicted of the murder and several assault charges and sentenced to life in prison. Her supporters claimed the trial was deeply unfair. They argued that some of the jurors should have been removed, and the defense team was bugged, and documents were leaked to the New York City Police Department. There was also evidence such as lack of gun residue on Shakur's hand and the injuries she sustained that should have made her not guilty. 2 years after the murder conviction, BLA members and other activists posed as visitors for the prison and brought Shakur out. She lived underground for several years, eventually fleeing to Cuba in 1984. The nation's leader then, Fidel Castro, granted her asylum. As a fugitive, Shakur continues to make headlines. 40 years after her arrest for killing Forrester, the FBI added Shakur to the top 10's most wanted terrorist list. President Donald Trump has demanded Cuba to release her, but the country has refused. In 2005, President Fidel Castro said of Shakur, "They wanted to portray her as a terrorist, something that was unjust, a brutality and an infamous lie." In the African American community, Shakur is regarded as many as a hero. Guys, if you liked this episode, please give it a like and subscribe for more content. Also, please, as I said before, comment who you want me to cover next.